Welcome to our Devos this week, and we are going to be looking at our second set of What's in a Name Devos. Believe it or not, there are so many times where God chooses to reveal who He is through His names in the Old Testament. And some of these, we just don't want to pass them up, so I hope you're ready for these. And if you remember, I said in week one, a couple weeks ago when we talked about this, the reason why this is important is because a name in the Old Testament, in the Oriental times in which it was written, a name carried with it the implication of who that person was. There was something more than just how it sounded, but it's more about their character, more about who that person would become. Well, in the case of God, when God is named in a particular part in the Old Testament, it's a revelation of how He's chosen to be to the particular people that use that name. So we see this happening a lot, especially in the early books of the Scriptures, in the Pentateuch, where we get an opportunity to see how the first people reacted to God and the names that they chose to ascribe to Him that He permitted Himself to be known by. So here's a popular one that some of you would know if you listen to Caleb. And this one is called Jehovah Jireh. There's that popular, I believe it's an Elevation song where it's Jireh. I was just singing it with Pastor Jason, and he told me that I should stick to the preaching. But Jireh has the implication of being a provider. And this is definitely an attribute of God that we see throughout His character and His nature. But specifically, as we look at the instance and the story surrounding God taking this name, it was Abraham. When he had his first, the promised child, Isaac. And if you remember, Abraham, all he wanted his whole life, because God had told him that he was going to have the nation, the entire nation, coming through his lineage, coming through his family. And so he had this wonderful idea that he was going to be the father of many nations, because that's literally what Abraham means. Unfortunately, it came in a way that Abraham would have never expected. Finally, as the promised child, Isaac, things seem to be going well until one day God calls upon Abraham. Just like He called upon Abraham to leave his home, God calls upon Abraham and He tells him that today you must bring your child up and sacrifice your child to me. Now, understanding that from a perspective of the culture of the time, you'd think how horrible Abraham would be to think of this. But remember, Abraham is pagan. He's not coming up from a Christian standpoint that we're used to. So take your culture and put it away for a second and realize that at this day and age, at this time, people were doing that sort of thing constantly. Abraham didn't know the God that had called him that well, and so this was just something that, an act of faith and an act of obedience. So Abraham takes Isaac, he takes him up to the mount, he's about to sacrifice him, he lifts up the knife, and God stops him. And God says that Abraham has passed the test. I always wonder what the conversation was like between Isaac and Abraham on the way down the hill after this. We weren't there. We'll found out about it in heaven. But essentially, Abraham realizes he just passed the test. And in fact, God is going to permit Isaac to live. Now, Abraham worships God right there when he realizes that God has provided another animal for them to sacrifice. And this is what Abraham says. In Genesis chapter 22, verse 14, it says, Abraham called the name of the place, the Lord will provide, or Jehovah Jireh. As it is said on this day, on the mount of the Lord it shall be provided, because God provided Himself the sacrifice that was needed. And it's interesting now, as we think about our lives, as we think about this name, how often do we try to expel our energy and our means? And we work and we work and we work only on our energy, when maybe sometimes we have to stop and ask God to help us by providing. Sometimes God shows who He is as Jehovah Jireh in so many unbelievable ways. There are times when you're expecting something to happen and it falls through, and then God shows up in a remarkable way on the side and He blesses you. That's Jehovah Jireh. He is the provider. He is the one who is glad to provide. So right now, wherever you are in your life, if you're thinking about being in a place of want or a place of need, remember that you worship Jehovah Jireh and that He enjoys to provide for you.